Period 3, this is just for you. We have an agenda today. We're not going to do our do now, but we're going to go with norms and expectations, announcements, objectives, and then we're going to get into microevolution. Excuse me. I'd like to remind you to be punctual, be prepared, be productive, be present, and be polite. Those are our norms and expectations. You're going to have 5 slides of notes today. So as you're watching this ed puzzle, be sure to have your notebook out and be taking these notes. You will need them for our next quiz. If you missed class on Monday, you do have a gizmo called Bird Beaks and Rainfall or Rainfall and Bird Beaks. You can find it to the left of the storage room door in that black folder. You can pick it up and have it done by Friday. Directions are in the assignment on Schoology. I do have office hours on Thursday if you need help completing that assignment. And then just a heads up, 5-week grades are due next week. So the deadline to submit work is 3:30 on Friday for paper submissions and 11:59 p.m. for electronic submissions. Today, you're going to be able to differentiate between 3 common types of microevolution and predict how environmental changes may affect the evolution of populations. Um, Variation or genetic variation in a population increases the chance that some individuals will survive. So we're going to look at how that variation does that today. And I want you to think, what are the 2 main sources of genetic variation? Hopefully you got it right. Sexual reproduction causes genetic variation, and also genetic mutations cause genetic variation. So that should be a review. And now we're going to get into some new things. So genetic variation leads to a distribution of various traits. And that means that we're going to see some traits on the small side or the low side. Other traits are going to be on the high side or the larger side. And in the middle, you're going to have normal distribution. So if you look at this graph on the left, you can see there's a range of the variable, which is going to be your variation. On the left is going to be, the low end of the range. On the right is going to be the high end of the range. And in the middle is going to be the mean, the middle, the average. Okay. You look to the left or the right side of your slide. Here is a distribution of men and women's heights. So we're looking at heights. At the bottom, you can see that the variable on the bottom is heights. A lot of people on this graph think, oh, it shows that women are taller than men because that pink line is taller than the blue line. But if you look at it carefully, height is on the x-axis and the frequency, or how many individuals or what percentage of the population is that height, is on the y-axis. So what this graph is actually saying is that women have a higher frequency of their average height than men. The women's average height is maybe 64 inches, which is 5'4", which tracks. Men's average height is maybe 70, 71 inches, which is like 5'10", which also tracks for men. Here is your first slide of notes. Individuals cannot evolve. You need to write that down big, highlight it, circle it, put a star next to it. Individual organisms cannot evolve. No matter how much those little red beetles in this picture want to be blue, because the blue ones are most fit, they can't change to blue. Now, natural selection can act on them, and they can survive and pass on their genetics, or die and not pass on their genetics. That's how natural selection works. A population is the smallest unit that can evolve. So again, individuals cannot evolve, but natural selection can act on an individual, and a population is the smallest unit that can evolve. Today, the main goal of our lesson is to talk about microevolution. Microevolution is an observable change in variations within a population, especially over a short period. So micro means tiny. Evolution is a change over time. So we're looking at tiny changes in populations over time. Remember, a population is the smallest unit that can evolve. We're looking at tiny changes over a short amount of time in the smallest unit that can evolve, which is a population. So microevolution occurs within one population, and it occurs when the environmental conditions change. Microevolution is caused by natural selection, and there are three types of natural selection that are under microevolution. And the three types are your next three slides. It's directional selection, stabilizing selection, and disruptive selection. So each time I introduce a new word, I'm going to show you a quick video, and then we'll go into some examples. So that's the kind of the pattern of this slide. So please enjoy.
Now on to the types of natural selection. There are three categories of natural selection: directional selection, where one extreme is favored; stabilizing selection, where an intermediate is favored; and diversifying selection, where both extremes are favored simultaneously. These can be a bit difficult to envision, so we're now going to go over an example and a graph for each one. You might see graphs like this on various standardized tests. They're very popular on exams like the AP, the IB, the A-level, etc. They can sometimes have different colors or orientations, but the most important thing is to remember that one line usually shows what a population used to look like, and the other line shows what the population looked like later on.
So that is the big takeaway from these graphs. When you see them on a test, one line shows the original population, and the other line shows the population after the microevolution. So let's test it out.
Now on to the types of.
So the first type of microevolution that we're going to be talking about today is directional selection. Directional selection causes a shift in the distribution of population's traits to one extreme. So this dotted line is the original population, and we're talking about beak size, just like in the gizmo. On this dotted line, you have some beaks that are small on the right side, or sorry, the left side, some beaks that are large on the right side, but the vast majority of beaks are right here in the center in this population. Now, something happened, an environmental change, and now we have a shift in the beak size in the population, and this shift is towards larger beaks. So now the average beak is larger than it was in the previous population. So our example is birds with larger beaks have higher fitness. Therefore, the average beak size increases. This graph might look familiar to you. It's from the gizmo, and it shows you a kind of normal distribution of beak depth. You have beaks ranging from 7 millimeters to 14 millimeters. In the gizmo, you guys made a drought. And so what happened to the beak sizes after the drought? Look what's happening. This is Miss Watson's attempt at animation. The beak sizes, the average beak size got larger. And if you look at that chart right there, you can see that the beak sizes now no longer range from 7 to 14. Now they range from 12 to 14 millimeters. So the shift was to larger beaks. And here is a quick video to talk about another example.
Directional selection, one extreme phenotype is favored rather than an intermediate. Directional selection can be a subtle shift, or it can occur more dramatically, as in the famous case of the peppered moths. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, a population of light-colored moths inhabited the city of Manchester in the UK. These moths blended in beautifully against the neutral-colored tree bark and buildings. Darker-colored moths were virtually unknown, as they were so easy for predators to see. However, by the year 1848, the moth population had almost entirely changed color. Dark-colored moths were now the norm, and light-colored moths were more rare. Why? The city of Manchester rapidly became industrialized right around that time. The new coal-burning factories covered the city with dark, greasy soot. With the new darker habitat, predators could easily spot the light-colored moths, and any moths born with the dark color mutation were much more likely to survive long enough to reproduce. Over time, the population shifted from nearly all light-colored moths to nearly all dark moths. Other examples of directional selection include Darwin's famous population of finches, who were more likely to survive if their beaks were better suited to the food that was most readily available.
So we've looked at both of those in class. Incidentally, both of them were gizmos. So hopefully you guys have a good idea of what we're talking about here. And a final example I'm going to give you is one that is endemic to Southern California or off the coast of Southern California. On the mainland in the United States, we have these foxes called gray foxes, and that's the fox pictured on the left. If you go out to the Channel Islands, like Catalina, those islands just off the coast of Southern California, you're going to find a species called the Channel Islands fox or the islands fox. And these foxes obviously descended from this gray fox, but they have evolved to be about 30% smaller than the gray fox. So on the island, there was directional selection towards the smaller side. Remember, there's going to be variation in that population of foxes. Some are going to be small, some are going to be big, most are going to be average. But somehow on the islands, the smaller foxes were selected for, and individuals that were too large were selected against. So you see these foxes, and here is a picture of a gray fox skin, and here is a picture of an island fox skin. They're much, much smaller. Try and think, what might have selected for smaller foxes? What could smaller foxes be able to do on an island that they might not be able to do on the mainland? Our fourth slide of notes is about stabilizing selection. Stabilizing selection is selection in which the intermediate or the middle trait is favored and becomes more common. Stabilizing selection decreases genetic variation. And the classic example of stabilizing selection is peacocks. So peacocks have their tail. Hopefully you guys know why male peacocks have a tail. It's to look nice for the lady peacocks, right? And lady peacocks just love a large tail. The bigger the tail, the healthier the peacock, the more likely it is to pass on good genes to that female's offspring and have strong offspring. However, the females are selecting for large tails, but predators are able to catch peacocks with really, really large tails. They can't move very fast. Their tails drag on the ground as they try to fly away. And so those peacocks that have extremely large tails are more likely to get eaten by predators. So there is this intermediate trait, big enough to attract the ladies, small enough to get away from predators, and that makes stabilizing selection. Most male peacocks have a tail within a very specific range.
In stabilizing selection, an intermediate phenotype is favored rather than one or both extremes. A great example is a peacock tail. Male peacocks are famous for their enormous colorful tails, which they use to attract female peacocks. Usually, females prefer the males with the largest and most highly colorful tails because they signal that the male is healthy and probably has good genes. Based on this, we might assume that the goal is to have as large of a tail as possible. However, in addition to attracting all the ladies, enormous tails have a couple of significant drawbacks. Males with exceptionally large tails are much more likely to be eaten before they have a chance to pass on their genes. The best of both worlds is to have a tail that is large enough to attract a mate, but not so large as to prevent you from flying. Male peacocks actually can fold up their tails and fly, but not very far. Other examples of stabilizing selection include birth weight in humans and stem height in plants. In both cases, the intermediate is favored.
So, the example that was kind of hinted at in the video is human birth weight. I want you to read this picture and answer the questions that I'm about to ask. What is on the y-axis? I'm sorry, what is on the x-axis? What is represented on the x-axis? What is represented on the left y-axis? What is represented on the right y-axis? What do those blue-green bars represent? What does that red line represent? And overall, what is this graph showing? So the graph is showing that human babies that are born, the percent of the population in the birth weight range of between 2.7 and 3.2. It's kind of the average, but it can go anywhere from maybe 2.1 to maybe 4.1 is a pretty normal average range. Babies born in that average range have a lower percent of or lower chance of infant mortality. Infant mortality means death. So is as babies are smaller, you can see that scary red line. The smaller you are at birth, the higher the chances that you don't make it. And then conversely, on the other end of that graph, the bigger you are at birth, the higher the chances of infant mortality as well. So that is selective stabilizing selection. The two extreme phenotypes, really small and really big, are being selected against, and the middle trait, average weight, is being selected for. Our final slide of notes is disruptive or diversifying selection. This occurs when both extreme traits are favored and an intermediate or middle trait is selected against. So this is kind of the opposite of stabilizing. The outside, the extreme traits are being selected for, and that middle trait is being selected against. Now, this is super rare, but one example could be a change in environmental coloration from an invasive species or a plant die-off or something like that. And that color now favors the extreme ends of the color spectrum and selects against that intermediate color. So in this case, at the bottom, you have tan, orange in the middle, and kind of dark orange or dark brown on the right. And something changed. The original population is the dotted line. Something changed in that population, and now the extreme colors, the darker and the lighter, are being selected for. Can you guys think of anything that might represent this? If you can't, go ahead and watch this video and it will give you the answer.
In diversifying selection, both extremes are selected for simultaneously, while the intermediate is selected against. Diversifying selection is much more rare relative to directional and stabilizing selection. If you think about it, it's pretty rare to have two extreme phenotypes that are equally useful at the same time, but it does happen. Rock pocket mice are an excellent example of diversifying selection. Much of the southwestern U.S. is made up of hot, dry desert climate with light-colored sand. The mice tend to have light-colored coats, and it allows them to hide from predators. However, in an area called the Valley of Fires in New Mexico, the light sand is suddenly punctuated by a large area of dark rock. This area is known as the El Malpais lava flow. Scientists believe that it is from a volcanic eruption that occurred roughly 5,000 years ago. In the area surrounding the lava flow, dark-colored rock pocket mice can also be found. Prior to the lava flow, any rock pocket mouse born in the desert with a dark coat as a result of random mutation likely would not survive long enough to reproduce. It would stand out against the light-colored sand and would be an easy target for predators. When the lava flow suddenly added areas of darker habitats, dark-colored mice suddenly were better able to survive. Today, across the Valley of the Fires region, we can now find both light and dark-colored mice. But what about intermediately colored mice? A mouse with an intermediate coat would not be well suited to either the light sandy environment or the dark rocky environment. Because it would struggle to hide from predators, it would likely not survive long enough to reproduce. Because both the light and dark extremes are favored, our final population graph would look like this. As a wrap-up, let's quickly.
So we've seen most of these examples. We've done the peppered moth, we've done the bird beak, we've done the rock pocket mice, and hopefully now you guys are able to put a name to it. I'm going to give you another example of potential diversifying selection. So we're going to look at these birds here. So if you look on the left-hand side, you see some variation within a population of birds. Okay, this is all one population, and there's variation, just like we have variation in the colors of our skin, our feet, length, or something like that. There's variation in the way these birds look. So, um, what bird, A, B, C, or D, do you think might be able to easily eat each of these types of seeds? So we have chia seeds, pumpkin seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds, sunflower seeds, and sesame seeds. Now, for a second, imagine what would happen if the pumpkin seeds, the hemp seeds, and the flax seeds were suddenly to leave the environment. Something happened, those plants are no longer giving those seeds. Which birds, which variations in this species do you think would be most successful at eating the chia seeds, the sunflower seeds, and the sesame seeds? Hopefully, you were able to identify that bird A and bird D. The huge beak would probably have the best luck at eating the sunflower seeds, and this teeny tiny beak would probably be able to pick up these really small chia seeds and sesame seeds and be able to be good at eating those. The intermediate types with the medium sized beak, their beak would probably be a little too large to eat the small seeds, a little too small to eat the really big seeds. And so this would be an example of disruptive selection. Birds with the smallest beaks and birds with the largest beaks would be able to be most fit, and the birds with that intermediate sized beak would be selected against. So now we're going to get 3 questions. These are really checks for understanding. Remember, you can do this Edpuzzle multiple times. So if you don't get it right the first time, go back and rewatch, review your notes, and try again. So golf flies come in various sizes. These little things right here in this picture are golf flies. So these flies have this little stinger at the bottom. They lay their eggs inside of the stem of a plant. Their larvae grows up inside of that stem and creates this what's called a gall. So woodpeckers attack the larger galls. So if you look here, here's the gall fly laying its egg inside the stem of the plant. Here is the larvae developing and creating this gall. And here is a bird eating the gall. So they peck at the gall and they eat the larvae out of there. So woodpeckers attack large galls, and wasps attack really small galls. So as a result, middle-sized galls are most common. Is this an example of sexual selection, disruptive selection, stabilizing selection, or directional selection? Hopefully you were able to assess that this is stabilizing selection. The middle trait is being favored. Wasps are taking out or selecting against the smallest galls. Woodpeckers are selecting against the largest galls, and that middle trait is being favored. Next, the natural variation in a butterfly species is shown below. So here you have a range of colors from golden to blue, and that's one species. It has all that variation. Blue flowers get introduced into the butterfly's environment. Sorry about that. Blue flowers get introduced into the butterfly's environment and they spread rapidly, and they look like this. So now the butterfly's entire environment is blue. What type of selection do you predict the butterfly population would undergo? Would it have sexual selection, disruptive selection, stabilizing selection, or directional selection? Hopefully you were able to identify that this would be directional selection. The shift would be towards the extreme, the very blue butterflies. So everything on the right side of their range would be more selected against, and everything on the left side of their range would, or sorry, everything on the right side would be selected for, and everything on the left side would be selected against. Final check for understanding, and this one is the most complicated one. The normal distribution of the Mexican spadefoot toad tadpoles is shown to the right. So if you look at the graph on the right, we are looking at mouth size. That's the trait that we're looking for, mouth size. So we have small mouths on the left, large mouths on the right, but in average, most of these tadpoles have a medium-sized mouth. Tadpoles with really large mouths can eat shrimp and other tadpoles. Tadpoles with really small mouths can eat algae and detritus, which is dead material. Tadpoles with medium-sized mouths are left to compete with one another for resources. What type of selection might happen when resources are low? Are we going to have sexual selection, disruptive selection, stabilizing selection, or directional selection? The answer is going to be disruptive selection. Why? Because in times when resources are low, the tadpoles with the large mouth are going to be able to eat other tadpoles, right? Tadpoles with large mouths will be able to turn cannibalistic and eat their brothers and sisters. Tadpoles with very small mouths are going to be able to feed on the detritus, the dead tissue. So if resources are limited, all of these organisms are starting to die off. And those tadpoles with very small mouths are going to be able to eat that dead and decaying material. So this is an actual real life example of that rare case of disruptive selection. You guys see these questions on a test? Hopefully you will remember them from this Ed puzzle and be able to correctly answer them. That's it for me, and have a great day.